Hello and welcome to episode 1 of the 5th week event. If you were with us for episode 0, you might remember that I was sick, and some people said that it made me sound rather husky and or as if I was trying to sound sexy. This time around, I have allergies, so I will probably sound rather whiny, nasally, and geeky. You can decide for yourself whether or not that's an improvement. For this episode, I have a story that I think that I probably should have told last year when I was doing D&D month. If you recall, I was telling stories about my friends and my time around playing Dungeons & Dragons. This story, it has something to do with Dungeons & Dragons, but it's for a different game. It's for a game called Hero System, which is actually my favorite RPG system ever. It's really complicated to put together, but it's really, really worth it because it lets you make a very detailed character with some very interesting pieces that go with it. If you've been reading my blog on the main site, descendantserial.com, you'll remember that the character of Warwick Kane was originally created for a game that I was playing in using the hero system that was based in the X-Men Academy X storyline. And around the time we were playing, me and the person that you might know from the forums named Firasha, she's one of my best gaming friends, we decided we were going to run our own. But we were going to run it as a forum game, as a big game. If you may have heard of the Xavier Institute forum game, which is kind of a big one, kind of a big deal. I keep meaning to play in it, but I never get around to it. But anyway, we were going to run this, and if you're familiar with running forum games, even the forum games that I'm running now, you know it takes a lot of work because people aren't on the same schedule as the DM would be. So we decided we would divide up the work. Both me and Fi would be the co-game masters. And in order to do that, we decided to create the school from scratch. Rather than using the actual Xavier Institute, we were going to make a different one, so we weren't beholden to the Marvel Universe's rules and concepts. Basically, we were running this in Marvel 620 instead of their main universe 616. Think of it that way. So the thing was that each one of us were going to make some of the staff, and each one of us were going to make some of the students. Which, character creation, once you get into Hero, creating new characters is the most fun part. I'm going to see if she'll allow me to do this. Firasha came up with a spreadsheet that makes creating hero characters take about 5 minutes, despite the fact that normally with all the math that Hero requires, it can take a couple of hours. But she made this spreadsheet that makes it super easy, and it is the best thing ever. So, anyway, in creating these characters, and I think you'll realize that now that the game never really got off the ground, I ended up creating most of the initial Lidecker Institute students. My first contribution was Betty Sinclair, aka Rapunzel. Her thing was that she had this Medusa hair, and she is also the only character that is not related to D&D, so I'm going to get her out of the way before we get into the D&D geek talk stuff. She was based on the fact that around the time that we were designing this game, the trailers for Tangled were coming out. Tangled being the Rapunzel movie that Disney did, which was a very good movie, and I highly recommend it. But the trailer made it look like her hair was actually prehensile, like it moved on its own, and it beat up our main character when they first showed it. It turns out in the movie that it's not like that at all. I think it's actually pretty much cooler than that in the fact that she is just that good at manipulating her hair and making it do things. But at the time, it looked like she had the Medusa hair thing going, and I really liked the concept of giving, and I had already decided that Betty was going to be our mean girl. Our TV Tropes now calls it the alpha bitch, which I really hate that I don't have a problem saying bitch, but I really hate the fact that they called it the alpha bitch because it it doesn't really capture it. When they used the Libby, that's what they called it before. It was based on the character Libby from Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and I think her name was just perfect for that type of character. And I like calling that type of character the Libby. Other places call her the Queen Bee or just the Mean Girl. My favorite Libby being Cordelia Chase from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So of course we were running a high school game, so I really wanted to make our Libby. So that's why I created Betty, and I gave her the prehensile Medusa hair based on the fact that all Libbies have in common the fact that they look down on anyone that's not pretty and prim. So I couldn't give her like the weird power where you have scales or chitin or crap. She had to still be, I don't want to say actually pretty, traditionally pretty. She would still be traditionally pretty. She wouldn't be a cute monster girl. Those are the people that she looks down on. So I gave her the super hair, so she'd still be pretty, but she would have this badass power that was actually kind of threatening. If Betty wanted to hurt you, she can hurt you. And that's the thing. She prefers to hurt you in your feelings. She's a bad person. I like characters who are bad people. They're not bad guys. They're not somebody that you can fight directly. They're just bad people. You know, somebody you just want to smack. But yeah, so that is Betty. Besides Betty, though, and this is the story that I want to tell for D&D month, most of the students from the Lydecker Institute, the initial students, they were based on concepts from Dungeons & Dragons, mostly spells or magic items. And the first and foremost is my favorite character from Lydecker Institute, Kura Akagi, a.k.a. Omnigirl, a.k.a. Show Off, a.k.a. the one that doesn't know how to stop making up code names for herself. Kura's power is based on the 0 level spell. It's one of the first spells you could ever cast in D&D, if you so choose. It's called Prestidigitation. Prestidigitation is when you cast it, for the next hour you're able to make magic-y things happen. Like, most of them are, it's sort of stage magic. But it's really, really crazy powerful when you stop and think about it. Prestidigitation, once you have it up, you can change the color of anything. You can change the flavor of anything. Some interpretations, you can change how it feels. You can also, and this is the weirdest one to me, it says you can clean or soil in a square of space. It doesn't say what you're soiling it with. I'm always concerned about what that actually is. It's magic, whatever it is, but magic what? Ugh. So you can do a bunch of things. It lets you slowly heat up or cool down an area. It makes you create little cheap objects that you cannot use as a tool or sell. But you can, say, make a deck of cards, make some game pieces, make like little fake flowers to give to somebody. That's cool. But so I thought of that, and I was like, what if you could just do that? And my interpretation of it is that you're changing the sensory output of things. Like, when she makes a cheap object, she's just changing the sensory output of a section of nothing, of air. So the, I always thought that was a fun thing to do, and it's not very, you would think it's not very useful, but I've shown in the series that you can make an optical illusion that makes people feel sick. That's frickin' powerful. So the other thing that I gave her was I gave her what I refer to as her little scooter flight. She can move 2 feet per 6 seconds in D&D terms. A round in D&D is 6 seconds. She can move 2 feet in it. She's far, far slower than walking speed. And the joke there is, and how do I put this? D&D designers, unlike most designers for most games, are really afraid to let characters fly. And it's not hard to see why, because if you haven't read the whole book and all the rules for flight, it looks like Well, if you have a monster that's an ogre or some kind of, like, ankylosaur or owlbear, they can't get you if you're flying. They can't hit you. And that sort of makes sense. If you are playing on a giant featureless plane, when you play D&D, and maybe people don't know this, but the first D stands for dungeon. A dungeon is a place. It's a hole in the ground full of evil and monsters. And that dungeon has a ceiling. You know, maybe it'll be a super tall ceiling like Moria in the Lord of the Rings movies, but it's still a ceiling. And if you try to fly up there, you can't go higher than that ceiling. And a lot of the ceilings in the dungeon corridors, they're maybe 10 feet high. You can still reach them. Things have reach. You know, they can still kick your ass. And even if you're outside in a forest. A forest has trees. Trees have these odd protuberances called branches. But I'm getting off on a tangent here. They are really, really scared of characters that fly. So I made a joke that apparently God decided Kura could not fly more than 2 feet because he was afraid of what she could do. That's so blasphemous, but that's actually the joke that I kept making when I was telling my friends about her. But yeah, that's Kura and her scooter flight and press to power. The next character I want to talk about is Phil Sims, aka the Pack Rat. And Phil is based on, I'm not sure if every group has this tendency. Every group I've been in has this tendency, which is really weird because I've been in some really diverse groups that none of them know each other. They just do this. And the scenario here is this. Whenever your characters finally get enough money where they can go out and buy a magic item of their choice, and by the way, 5th edition doesn't let you do this, but I'm sure people are going to be able to finagle this out of their dungeon master anyway. The first thing you buy, is it going to be your +1 weapon that lets you stab things easier? Oh, hell no. Is it going to be some item that gives you +5 to a skill check and makes you all badass for the thing that you do? Oh, no. No, the first thing you buy is Heward's Handy Haversack. For those of you that don't know much about D&D, but do know about fantasy, you probably know the term bag of holding. Heward's Handy Haversack is like an economy-sized bag of holding. It's a backpack that has lesser bags of holding for the main pack and the little pockets on the side. The deal with Heward's Handy Haversack is, A, it's cheaper than a bag of holding, and B, when you go to reach in Heward's Handy Haversack, it automatically gives you the item that you want. It's always on top. So it's strictly better than having a bag of holding because you have to rummage in your bag of holding. And if you're in real life, you would much, much rather have the smaller bag that gives you what you want instantly than the giant sack that you just put crap into. So my thoughts here were, the reason that I gotta point this out first. The reason that you always go for the Heward's Handy Haversack is because in D&D and in a lot of games, there's bookkeeping that is obnoxious. You don't want to do it. It's not fun, but it's put in there for realism, and it's one of those realism things that kind of still has a point. The idea is that you have encumbrance. Encumbrance is, based on your strength, you can only carry so many items. And it makes sense because you don't want people just going, oh, I'm just going to carry off that gold statue. And, you know, some characters actually can, but you try to stop people from just looting everything ever because that's stupid and obnoxious. And the DM would never be able to put dungeon dressing in because they're just going to cash in on the dungeon dressing. So they have encumbrance, but it's really annoying even when you're inside your encumbrance because you have to go, well, this weighs 1 pound and this weighs 5 pounds and I have to add all this up, but then I use this, so I don't have this anymore. And it's annoying, and no one really cares about it. There are people that say they care about it, and there's DMs that'll track it. They're like, oh, are you encumbered? And I hate that. And I think everybody, when they're actually playing the game, hates that. And that's why you go and get the handy haversack, because once you have the handy haversack, you can go, I don't care about encumbrance. I have the sack. The sack means I'm not encumbered. That's all it really has to do. It says that I'm not encumbered, and I don't have to pretend to care about encumbrance. Let's get the game going. So, it's worth the 2,500 gold that you spend on it just to say that, because some DMs are real hard asses about what you're carrying. But anyway, so I realized that if you weren't playing D&D, and if you weren't limited by how many items you could carry, and by what's usually a very small list of non-magical useful items that you can carry. Yeah, they have rules for carrying pots and pans, but who gives a crap about pots and pans? Nah, you care about your grapple gun and your alchemist fire and your tanglefoot badge, because those are the cool stuff. And I was thinking that if you had the massive carrying capacity like that, and you weren't limited by wealth by level and having to have magic items and all this, you could become Batman. You would have the handy haversack is your utility belt. You could just store whatever you want in that thing and become, well, Batman. You can use your items out of there, and so I thought that is actually a good superpower. It's a superpower that enables being Batman, having this extra dimensional space that you can store crap in. And I was like, well, I could do better than that. So the first thing that I did when I was coming up with the idea for the power is there's no time in this extra dimensional space. Like when you put something in there, time stops for it. So if you have a lit torch, which I don't know why Phil would have a lit torch in 2074, but if he had a lit torch, or if he had a sandwich, you put it in there and time stops for it. So you can put that sandwich in there and years later take it out and it's a fresh sandwich. Still good. Not even, the bread didn't even go stale. The other thing I did, and this was to make it at least slightly offensive, was I let it conserve momentum. The same momentum that something is put into the bag, you can let it come out of the bag at. And in the story, he actually does this. They pitch fastballs into it, and he does that for pitching. In the more practical sense, like if he decides to grow up to be a superhero, a lot of these characters are going to be superheroes. You just know it, but I don't know if Phil would. Phil doesn't have the personality for it, but if he does grow up to be a superhero, it would be a really neat trick for him to catch bullets with it and be able to fire them out in like a trick shooting thing. You know, I'm Mr. Thou Shalt Not Kill, so I don't want him shooting the bullets back at people. But if he could just angle the bullet up and hit a sign and knock it down on them, that would be awesome. So, that was my idea for Phil. And I have a lot of fun with the concept, especially the fact that he has to like do the little spinning of his finger to make stuff emerge, and the fact that he it's a power built for mundane utility, so he keeps his toothbrush in there, he keeps extra towels. The fact that he keeps towels in there and all that, that's the Hitchhiker's Guide joke that I think not a lot of people got because I didn't make a big deal about it, but yeah, he's a hoopty fruit that knows where his towel is. The next character I want to talk about with this is Jacob Richmond, aka Summit. Jacob Richmond isn't based on a spell or anything. Jacob Richmond is based on something that happens in D&D, or happened in D&D. Nowadays, if you play the modern games, they usually tell you to use what's called the standard array, which is, this is how you arrange your statistics, your strength, constitution, dexterity, and they give you a set of 6 numbers and you put them where you want. Or you do this thing called point buy, where you have a certain number of points, and each point can be spent for a certain amount to raise a certain amount of those statistics. It's a lot more balanced and stuff, but it's a lot less wacky and fun than actually rolling the dice and seeing what you do. Back in the day, we rolled our dice. And I like saying that because it makes me sound like an old grognard. But yeah, back in the day, what we would do is you would roll 4d6, and you would drop the lowest dice. And you do that 7 times and drop the lowest set, and then you would arrange your dice. That's what we would do. More hardcore groups just straight up rolled 3d6 dice in order and put them down in their thing. I'm not brave enough for that. I'm the guy that complained about Wizards having low hit points for 3rd edition, and I am not going to play with a character that accidentally got a bunch of 3s and everything. So, but the idea for Jacob was his player, quote-unquote player, rolled his dice and honestly got 18 strength, that's the maximum for a roll, 18 dex, 18 constitution. He is at the maximum human potential for all of those. He's Captain America. That's literally Captain America's power set. He doesn't know how to throw a shield, but that is what Captain America, that's what the super soldier serum does for Cap. That's what nature did for Jacob. The problem is that Jacob rolled average. Not bad, but average for his intelligence, his wisdom, and his charisma. He's got a pretty good charisma. People like him. But, yeah, he rolled average for intelligence and wisdom. So, the conflict here is that the kid really wants to see himself as the perfect human being. Because he's a teenager and he doesn't really understand that that's not attainable. And the other fact is that in D&D land, having all 18s in your physical stats, that would be enough. That would mean that you are set for life because you are statistically 15% better at doing anything than everyone else. You know, your average human being. But in the real world, just being big and strong doesn't really... Even like a soldier, soldiers today have to know how to maintain their weapons and firing. Soldiers today probably need dex more than they need strength, if you're going to go think about it that way. And whiz, they probably need to have a higher wisdom than anything, I'm pretty sure, for modern soldiers. But yeah, just being big and strong in today's society, even for a superhero, that's not going to cut it. He needs to be smarter, and he needs his education. His parents understand this, and he's starting to understand it. But he's spoiled by nature. He's not a spoiled character, but nature made everything physical so easy for him, and it really bothers him that the mental stuff didn't come easily. And I think that's a good... I haven't focused enough on Jacob. I think that there's not really a tragedy. It's a sort of teenage drama to call it tragedy, but there's a poignancy to his character that he is starting to realize that just because he is physically perfect, he is not perfect as a human being. And I think that's a good and interesting lesson for any superhero character to understand and learn. So yeah. And last, but certainly not least, we have Phineas, aka Xylem. He has a lot of different points of origin for him. The first being that I've always had this idea for dryads as a player race, for D&D. And traditional dryads, that's a problem because they're stuck to their tree. So I had this idea of dryads being able to move away from their tree and all that, just as long as the tree was protected. And that was how I first came up with the idea of this character. The other thing was that there was a character in New X-Men Academy X called Dryad. Her name was Callie, and yes, that's who Callie Krieger is named after. And we never got to see her powers. She was a character, she was pink with elf ears. And she was, the very few speaking roles she had, she was very nice. She, occasionally you saw her messing with the plants and stuff at the Xavier Academy. And then they killed her off. She wasn't even I don't think she was even one of the ones that was depowered. They just killed her off because, that's how the writers, I could rant about the writers forever, but that's what they decided to do. They killed off all the quote-unquote extra students. So creating a Dryad-like character, and yes, I did create a character that was much closer to her, what I imagined she would be like later, but creating a character like that was my sort of tribute to this character who I thought could have been used more. Could have been... There's a lot of characters in comics and other media that just never get utilized the way they should, and this is my way to let her live on, partially. But Phineas is his own guy, so that was part of it. And the other part of it was well, not really at the time, but a few years prior to my creating Lydecker Institute, Wizards of the Coast came out with this Splat book. Splat books, the supplementary books for Dungeons and Dragons, called Races of Stone. It had these big dudes called Goliaths. And they're not actually rock people, but the art made them look like rock people. And I've got to say, the Goliath art is some of the worst art in D&D, and that's saying something considering the sailfish dragons that they have. The metallic dragons have these big fins that go from their wings to their tails, and the minotaurs look like gorillas with horns. So, and dear Lord, the halflings from 5e, halflings and gnomes, it's just terrible. So, when I say the Goliath art is bad, I really, really mean it. But anyway, yeah, it was called Races of Stone, and the Goliaths seriously looked like rock people. So, we had this joke that when Races of the Wild came out, they would have plant people. And I can't remember if they actually did that then, but I know that they eventually put them in 4th edition. They had the wildlings, which were, in fact, plant people. But before 4th edition, when I found out about wildlings, I had already made as a joke Phineas, who is a plant kid. And I think the plant thing is kind of fun, because when you do research for these things, you find out a lot of weird world facts. Like, plants actually have vascular systems that do things like they work like muscles. It's hydraulic muscles. They pump liquid into one end and remove liquid from the other, and it curls. So that is how Phineas works, and I think that's kind of interesting. It's one of those author things that you talk about to authors about, and they're like, oh, that's really cool. And you can't exactly put it in the story, so I think that's why I had to tell about that. So there you have it. Those are the initial characters that I first made up for Lydecker Institute. Steampunk came later. Steampunk was sort of my take on X-23 from the same series, X-Men Academy X. I'll talk about that trope later and the origins of steampunk. But let me say thank you for listening to the 5th week event. I hope this has been enjoyable for you. I hope you come back next time I make another one of these. I'm shooting for once every 2 weeks. That's going to be my intention here. And like I said, the music and everything will follow. I actually have something in mind. I've found some royalty-free music that just requires attribution, which I can do. So things will get more elaborate, stories will get better, editing will get better, and I think a good time will be had by all. So once again, thank you for listening to the 5th week event, episode 1.